Hi there, and welcome to the Look-See for March 2024. The Look-See is a combination of news, commentary, and a bit of clairvoyant assessment in order to keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening in the world and the things that we would do well to think deeply about. The things that came up this month were mostly financial and political, but there were a few other things like the astrological chart for London in England, the trucker boycott in New York, the terms of service, new terms of service from T-Mobil, and issues around changes in the class structures of the US because of what's happening at the southern border. So let's begin. Number one, I actually was thinking of starting out with some comments about Joe Biden's State of the Union speech, but all I could think about was Joe Biden himself. So is it just me, or does anyone else notice that sometimes Biden is stumbling about, barely able to walk, unable to say complete and coherent sentences? And then suddenly we have something like a State of the Union speech, and he's a different man? Something's not real there. During the State of the Union speech, Biden, he just looked to me like he had a really bad Botox job around the eyes, which were all squinty, like slits in his face. Either that or he was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit his face and didn't fit around the eyes at all. Anyway, it bothers me greatly that he goes from shuffling along and mumbling nonsense to then giving suddenly these long, perfectly articulated speeches in which he shouts angry, blazing words. Is he a senile old man or not? In the end, I couldn't get past the squinty eyes, the angry energy, and the awful messages. It was the stupidest State of the Union message I have ever heard, and I've heard quite a few. And he didn't deal with anything I thought was important. Number two, in sharp contrast to Herr Biden, Robert Kennedy Jr. gave a 9-minute speech presenting how he sees our country that was straightforward and positive, yet without any propaganda or hype. It was honest without being negative or unrealistic. And it was forward-looking without leaving out we the people. It was an invitation to come together and rebuild. And I think if there is one thing that we should all be looking for, it is whether or not the leadership we support is inviting and including us in their plans to fix the USA. Number three, back in the January Look-See, I saw a serious disruption in the US presidential election in the fall. And there were some yellow police ribbons, the kind that you see around a crime scene. So this month I thought, let me go back and look and see if anything's changed or if I can see any more. And I saw something very disturbing. Several somethings. There were several timelines that were all coming together, and we're headed toward those, and we have to decide which one we want to be on. Timeline A, there was a serious natural disaster right before the election, which caused the election to be postponed. It was postponed until January, I thought, or maybe there was only an announcement in January that there was going to be an election in March. But that was the first thing I saw, timeline A. On timeline B, President Trump was no longer with us. Neither was Biden. There was no election because there were no candidates. It looked like Kamala might have been president for a minute, but that ended very quickly. And then there was timeline C, in which there was an election, but nobody was willing to honor it, and the country began breaking up. Maybe breaking down would be a better way to say it. It started with the secession of a southern state, which I thought was Texas. So think about these timelines for a moment. Which one would you prefer to be on? How are you going to feel if any of these things happen? Are you prepared emotionally and mentally to handle yourself and your family if things do not go well around you? What will it mean to you if the U.S. begins breaking down and with it goes law and order? If the election is postponed and rescheduled for March, will you trust that it will happen? Will you trust that it will make a difference when it does happen? Can you be an anchoring presence for yourself and your family in the face of massive changes? Can you calm down and come back to center? Trusting the future if the election happens and we get a president you don't want? Do you have all your paperwork in order if you have to flee? I hope things don't get to that point, but if they do, and if you've prepared yourself, play out some things in your mind. If you've prepared yourself, it won't seem as bad as if it hit you broadside without any preparation. We are creating our reality one word, one thought, one action or decision at a time. What are we creating? And what else could we create? Number 4. The U.S. Congress has been kicking the financial can down the road for so long that I wasn't even surprised when they did it again. They raised the debt ceiling, which basically says that they're going to spend us into oblivion. There is no real budget for the U.S. and no real income other than the printing of more paper dollars. The good side of kicking the can down the road is that there's a possibility that a few more people will wake up and begin to prepare for the possibility of the collapse of our financial system. The bad side is that the longer the debt is not dealt with, the more destructive the collapse will be, and the more things it will take down with it, including our government. No matter how little money you think you have, set aside a few dollars, even if it's only $10 or $20 per week, and some change, maybe a roll of quarters or a roll of dimes every week. And every time you go to the grocery store, buy a few extra things for your pantry. Pretend you live in Florida and there's a hurricane coming. No one really knows how bad the storm will get, so you just prepare for everything. And leaving the town, even if it looks that bad. These are times to live lightly and remain flexible and alert. Number 5. Years ago, a man named Dave wrote to me after reading my book, The Evolving Human. So I wrote back, and we began to correspond. He was interested in psychic phenomena because he wanted to support himself by playing the horses at the racetrack. So I taught him a few things, and I have to say, eventually he did learn to support himself. Turned into a really good psychic. So anyway, along the way, I discovered that he was also studying astrology. Eventually, he asked me for my birth date so he could put together my chart. He said he was looking for clues in astrology that would indicate the possibility of a Kundalini awakening. So I gave him my birth date, and there was nothing in my chart using I think it's called the natal chart. So he asked me for the date of my Kundalini awakening. And that date was right around Valentine's Day, 1979. So he went looking, and to his surprise, almost all of the planets, all of my planets, were crowded into like 2 or 3 astrological houses. They were almost all in 2. He noted this, and he continued his research by then, writing to all sorts of authors, actors, actresses, very successful business people, and many people who were working as intuitives or psychics. And what he found was that many people who reported having an awakening or a Kundalini type event had that same type of configuration in their chart at the time of the awakening event. So all of that is background for something I saw the other day. I was watching a video by Pam Gregory titled New Supermoon in Pisces, March 10, 2024. And I was completely surprised to see that same or similar configuration on the chart displayed starting around 6 minutes, 11 seconds into the video. The chart was for the UK and London. So England might be in for a very powerful awakening and a change of heart and a change of consciousness. Once that happens, you can't go back. You can't go back to not knowing. The thing to know is that this kind of energy can change everything about them. So let's just watch and see if the awakening begins. It usually takes a few weeks to a couple months for the change to become obvious and the unfolding to become overwhelming sometimes. But when an entire nation wakes up, you should know that the entire world will be different. Number 6. Canada came up as I was looking forward, and it had something to do with a gathering storm of sorts in which the people were refusing to follow or to honor Trudeau's government. It looked like the word secession was in the wind, or maybe an announcement that someone was going to be beginning proceedings to remove Trudeau. Later, I saw a report that Trudeau had covered up an infiltration by the People's Republic of China into Canada's top virology lab. What was the PRC doing there? The report doesn't say, and it certainly does not build trust in your leadership when you lock people down because of a virus that no one has identified or been able to get a sample of, then force them to wear masks and get useless shots that turn out to be deadly, then try to pretend that you had no role in those deaths and nothing shady was going on in the virology labs. Uh-oh for Trudeau. Number 7. California is going to try and pass a law that offers free home loans to illegals coming across the southern border. I about fell over in shock when I read that. The man who wrote the bill was quoted as saying, quote, But the social and economic benefits of home ownership should be available to everyone, end quote. I was gobsmacked by that. What about helping the citizens who live and work there? What about helping the homeless already there? What about the taxpayers paying for it? What about helping people with the ridiculous cost of living and the outrageous taxes in California? The state government has set aside money for this plan that will cover the 20% down payment required by banks. And the new homeowner will not have to make any payments or even think about repaying the loan until he sells or refinances. You know what? This scheme is going to blow up in everyone's faces, the state, the taxpayers, and the new homeowners. To me, it looks like a sneaky scheme to get control of the land. Because when these homeowners discover how expensive it is to live in California, they will quickly begin to struggle. Without the demand to make payments, they aren't likely to be committed to the house. Without commitment, what is the likelihood they will default and abandon the house? Once they abandon it, the property will revert to the state. In this way, the state ends up accumulating and controlling large swaths of land a little at a time, slowly disenfranchising the people. Our forefathers believed that the right to property was both a guarantee of people's legal rights and essential to liberty. Slowly, the corrupt governments are walking away with these rights. Do you need to speak up, stand up, come up with a counter strategy? Start buying as much land as you can? Pay off whatever mortgage you already have? All I can say at the moment is be aware. Number 8. This is a question that has come up in the past, and I've always kind of brushed it aside, but it keeps coming up. So here's the question. How would you feel about living in a nice house with a decent yard and enough income to keep the lights on and pay for groceries if the majority of the nation was homeless and living in poverty? Is this something you would be comfortable with? Would you feel like the elite feel? That you don't want to mingle with the lowlifes on the planet? Would you put up big fences and cameras around your yard? Would you be comfortable going into the city or the grocery store? Would you hire 1 or 2 homeless people to do your shopping and clean your house and cut your grass and plant your flowers? Or does it never occur to you that our society is devolving into a class-based society and you don't mind because you have everything you need, and it never occurred to you that you could be isolated because of it? Number 9, Ukraine is running out of people. Originally, they had 34 million people living in Ukraine. About 20 million fled when the war started. That's more than half. That leaves 14 million people in Ukraine. 500,000 people have been killed in the war. That means there are only 13.5 million people left in Ukraine. The population of New York is over 19 million. There are more people in New York than Ukraine. Ukraine and Texas are similar in size, with Ukraine being slightly smaller at 233,000 square miles and Texas having 268,000 square miles. The population of Texas was 30.3 million in 2023. 8.1 million live in the Dallas area, and 7.4 million live in the Houston area, 2 cities. There are not even enough people left in Ukraine to fill 2 cities in Texas. I often wonder how many people have fallen for the propaganda that Russia is losing the war and Ukraine is winning. The truth is that Russia is winning and Ukraine is losing in every way. So sad. Number 10. We don't hear much about the trucker boycott started by Chicago Ray, but that's only because the mainstream media decided they would not report on it at all. Deliveries to New York are down about 20%, and Kathy Hochul is struggling to keep people calm and in place. 20% is a lot, and it will force a reorganization of thinking and action in the Big Apple. 20%, bless, that's kind of like a siege or a blockade. It looks like Chicago Ray was totally unprepared for the viral response to his video and backed away from his original position, but it was too late. He had inspired too many people into what I have previously described as not doing. Not doing means not continuing to behave or act in expected ways. It means learning from your mistakes. I'm not doing that again, that kind of thing. The truckers in Canada were immediately targeted by the government because they were an easy, centralized target. As for New York, the truckers have done the opposite. Their thinking is, well, let's just not show up there. This is not doing. It's a decentralized way of using power and is very difficult to counter. Truckers are not the only ones not doing. Investors are also not doing what they usually do, which is invest in New York. Why would they? If, like Trump, they could be fined $355 million at 9% interest and a daily penalty for non-payment being tacked on when there was no crime, no victim at all. Why would those investors put their family and their businesses at risk? Because Trump's sons were also fined millions of dollars. I agree with RJ Talks in the link below, and I find it both interesting and sad that truckers and investors are coming together to counter the mistakes of the ruling class and protest government overreach. And it is sad that it's come to that. And I'm glad they're doing it. This is a good thing, but it makes for a lot of disruption. Every month, things seem more out of control everywhere, but it's either that or we succumb to total control by people who don't care and cannot be trusted to do what is right or fair. Number 11. Has anyone seen the new terms of service update by T-Mobil that says they're going to start fining people for sending text messages containing content that does not conform to their SHAFT compliance guidelines? SHAFT stands for sex, hate, alcohol, firearms, and tobacco. Off Grid by Doug and Stacy, which is a channel, YouTube channel, have pointed out that lately there have been a lot of updates to our phones and computers. A lot of suddenly being logged off and needing to log back in again. This is because the big communication companies have been very busy. They're implementing new rules to entrap people. What are these rules? Text messages are going to be regulated according to legal and moral issues. There will be 3 levels of fines. Tier 1, I think they call it Tier 1, $2,000 for phishing, smishing, and attempting to get credit card numbers or social security numbers. Tier 2, $1,000 for illegal content regarding cannabis, marijuana, CBD, illegal prescriptions, and solicitation. So, content is defined as illegal if it's not legal in all 50 states. Let me read that again. Content is defined as illegal if it is not legal in all 50 states. And that's a big problem because some states have legalized cannabis and other drugs. Wow. So that was Tier 2. Tier 3 is $500 for all other violations, including but not limited to shaft, sex, hate, alcohol, firearms, and tobacco. So here we are with another big stress, another attempt to destroy free speech, another scheme to squeeze money out of people. This may be just a trial balloon to see if we will conform, but I think it's going way too far. Number 12. An announcement by an Ohio sheriff is disturbing. Rick Jones of Butler County, Ohio, attended a meeting of U.S. sheriffs in Washington, D.C., where they were briefed by FBI Director Christopher Wray, because the president of the U.S. refused to meet with the sheriffs. Evidently, he has also refused to meet with the police chiefs. So the president refuses to talk about border issues or crime. And they were told by Wray that at this point, at this moment in time, there are more red flags going on than there were before 9/11. Heads up there. In his remarks, Sheriff Jones said that he couldn't tell us everything, but that he could warn us that the U.S. was in a terrible way right now and was completely on the defense with no offense to help protect us. No offense. He said we needed to come together for our own safety. Can I say that again? We need to come together for our own safety. Water, air, food, and safety should be our priorities, according to Sheriff Jones. He also mentioned drone attacks that were being absorbed and not talked about. What is that? Drone attacks being absorbed. And he said, basically, we are on our own. There's so much going on, he said, that if we called them, the sheriffs would not be able to get there for a week. The borders will continue to stay open. The president does not care. And again, we are on our own. This is a disturbing message, but a lot of the messages we hear lately are disturbing. The important thing is to think about what you can do in various situations and not be waiting helplessly for the police or the sheriff to arrive. As Doug says, don't be caught flat-footed. Keep your head on a swivel. Number 13. There are only so many times I can talk about the coming financial changes without feeling like I'm repeating myself again and again. But I have to say a couple more things. The outlook for Bitcoin is up, up, and away in my beautiful balloon. But be aware, BlackRock is trying to get control of Bitcoin and the entire cryptocurrency market. BlackRock's plan, here's their plan, kind of in a nutshell, is to create a brand new, shiny global financial system based on climate, carbon, and the tokenization of Mother Nature. It will be run using cryptocurrency, and it will be just another iteration of the same old debt slavery system we've been struggling with since the days of Rome and Julius Caesar. According to Whitney Webb, BlackRock is going to use exchange-traded funds, ETFs, to control cryptocurrencies, while Larry Fink, Mark Carney, and Michael Bloomberg steer everyone using climate change policies maintained by the new global financial system and these things called multilateral development banks. Sounds like a replacement for Federal Reserve banks. So everything, including you, your house, your yard, your trees, rivers, lakes, land, and everything embedded in that land will be turned into an asset. These assets will be managed by asset managers. They will put a value on everything, and then they will break up this value into pieces or fractions called fractionalization and use it to trade, manage, and control the whole system. The whole different basis for trade and value. BlackRock wants us to move beyond the kind of government we used to have. Instead, they want to have these public-private partnerships that run everything, PPP, public-private partnerships. However, when they announced that, they got a lot of pushback because these kinds of arrangements used to be known as fascism. But now they've kind of taken on the patina of practicality. Nevertheless, because of the pushback, they have sort of gone underground, and they're trying to move their PPP, public-private partnership model, forward quietly and privately. And as Whitney points out, by going quiet and private, everybody thinks BlackRock has given up, and we've gone back to the free market system. But that is not the case. Fortunately, financial white hats are trying to lead BlackRock into a pit where they will eventually dissolve into bankruptcy. So here's where we are at now. We need to recognize the difference between a free market capitalist model and a technocratic model or PPP model. We need to decide which way we are going. We already have some idea of the free market model. We also have some idea of the PPP or fascist model. The technocratic model means scanning your embedded chip or your face or your eyeball when you need to go to the store for groceries, and then having the cost of your purchases subtracted from your allowance or your account. Is this really a more sustainable way of living, or is it just more consolidation of elite wealth? Do we really want to tokenize nature and pretend to trade bits of it on a carbon-based stock market? Or is this just another scheme for financial gains? We have to decide whether or not we want a whole new type of financial system that has control of everything: people, plants, animals, and all of the natural elements. In order to make this decision, we have to understand that underneath all of it is the plan to reduce the population by a huge amount in order to be able to manage such a system. The viability of the new financial system rests on a much smaller number of people, because it just wouldn't be possible to give everyone an allowance that would feed, clothe, shelter, and occupy them. And this is why we have been experiencing what we've been experiencing for the last few decades, and especially the last few years. Are you beginning to see how it all fits together yet? I will close this comment by saying that I have been struck many times by the attitude of many top investors. They are never concerned with the impact their investing has on anything except their pocketbook and their bank account. How can they ignore the loss of jobs, the retirement accounts that disappear, the loss of nest eggs? Why do they have so little concern for the stock market as a whole, or for the environmental effects of their investments? There's a loss of habitat for so many creatures, including us. And there's a failure to maintain a sense of balance and well-being for all. How much power do they need? How much power is enough? Where do they go once all the power in the world is in their hands? Then what? Are they going to sit back, smoke a cigar with feet on the desk, and gloat? How long will that last? A day? Maybe a week? When will men understand that the only thing that really fills them, heart and mind both filled, is when they feed the family, protect the house, and laugh with the children? Number 14. It is a time to clean up our world. Now, this is a topic that I want you to listen to very carefully. What sorts of things have we been doing to ourselves that are taking us down? Look at the fluoride in the water, which causes a reduction in the intelligence and creativity you have at your fingertips. Look at the sugar that is consumed by millions and millions of people, which temporarily shuts down the immune system, allows a bit of degeneration to take place, and lets various conditions get a hold of you. Look at the processed food being fed to everyone. Pretend food that has no nutrition in it at all. And that same processed food accelerates the degenerative process in the body. Look at the 35 years of terrible, terrible dietary advice to avoid fats. Advice that has resulted in an epidemic of overweight people with bad hearts, bad skin, bad brains, bad everything. Look at the use of mercury fillings in teeth, resulting in the terrible effects of mercury and other heavy metals in the gut, the brain, and throughout the body. Look at the use of pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides sprayed on our food as we pretend, oh, we're not poisoning ourselves. Look at the destruction of water in rivers, lakes, and oceans, forcing us to buy water from cities and big corporations that we don't know and have to trust that they're not putting anything in the water that would harm us. Look at the use of sewage as recycled water that was cleaned up chemically. ignoring the fact that water has one of the most prodigious memories in the entire reality. Water is the elephant of elements. Look at the spraying of chemtrails across our skies, resulting in denials that anybody's spraying anything when it's obvious that they are. Look at the need, the terrible pressing need that we have to stop poisoning ourselves, stop destroying our water, stop dumping waste everywhere, and to clean up our planet. That's a pressing need. Now, look at how similar that kind of talk is to the climate narrative and the green plan or the sustainable development goals. We hear about climate change and sustainable development goals all the time. But climate change and sustainable development goals are not the same thing as cleaning up the planet. Let me say that again. Climate change and sustainable development goals are not the same thing as cleaning up the planet. Climate change is a financial scheme to launder money into political pockets owned by people who never have enough and are never satisfied. Sustainable development is a scheme to control people, where they live, what they eat, and how they live. Climate change and sustainable development are not the same things as cleaning up the planet. They are not the same things as cleaning up the planet. They are an attempt to make things a little bit better for the elites without disturbing the wealth and the power of the elites. Cleaning up the planet is something else altogether. Cleaning up the planet would mean, among other things, changing the way we grow food, ending manufacturing processes that create monstrous amounts of toxic waste, refusing to pollute water because we are water, changing the way we produce energy for transportation, all of those things I just mentioned, produce the money that then produces the elites. That's why they're not the same thing. Cleaning up the planet would mean ending the destruction of human health and intelligence, something that would result in a veritable explosion of human energy, creativity, understanding, intelligence, and the evolution of consciousness, past the petty systems that keep us struggling to live instead of living to create, to invent, to explore, to discover. We are caught in a tangle of interwoven threads that need sorting out soon, or we will not survive. So that's it for this look-see. And for those watching or reading the look-see for the first time, this is a brief look at what's happening in our world and where the big trends are headed. Keep in mind that reality is not fixed. It is very dynamic and it changes according to what we are doing with our consciousness. Nothing becomes real until we make it real, until we make a choice or take some action, put something together or take something apart. It is those decisive actions that determine the path and the outcome. And of course, once we set something in motion, it takes a lot to make a change or get things going in another direction, especially when you're talking about an entire civilization. However, that is exactly the reason for looking ahead. If we don't like the direction we see things are going, we can make appropriate changes in a timely way. or prepare for what looks inevitable. If we see something we like, we can put some conscious attention on that outcome and help it along. In a physical reality system, there are a lot of energetic structures working together and tightly bonded to one another. Things just don't change instantly unless you change the energetic relationships, and we don't do that very well yet. We are still at the stage of trying to change the material objects and their relationships. So this is why bombs and guns are the most common tool for changing relationships. It's like being stuck at the stage of removing warts with sledgehammers. So before I get too far off track, I'll just say it's important to look ahead, assess what's happening, where we are going, so we know whether or not we need to do something different. So thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful month. Take care.